appreciate everybody's good attitude and working together during this whole year. Really, this whole year has had a lot of challenges. And so we could either let that really affect us and fall apart, or we could deal with it and work with it. And I think we've done our best to try to work with it and do the best that we can. And so I appreciate everybody with a good attitude and working together. And we're not out of the middle of the trouble yet, but we're working our way toward getting there. And I'm glad to be back in the building. We picked a good day to come back in weather-wise, but it's good to be back together and be able to worship in the comfort of a building. We don't have to worry about car batteries dying or cutting the car on because it gets too hot or any of those things. So I appreciate everybody's just willingness to work together. All right. We're going to talk this morning about dinosaurs. I don't know, have you ever heard a lesson about dinosaurs before? Maybe here, because I got this lesson idea from a guy named Andrew Roberts, who I think presented it here several years ago. And so I kind of took it and made this kind of my own. But we want to talk about dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are pretty popular today in movies and in the media. Alright, so dinosaurs are popular in movies and in the media. They find new fossils every now and again. When I don't even know what it was when I was a kid, that Jurassic Park movie came out and that was popular, right? Everybody want to talk about dinosaurs. And sadly, when dinosaurs are in the media, evolution gets a big boost. Dinosaurs are sort of the poster children for evolution. And we're always told that there's 65 million years in between dinosaurs and mankind. And so it seems like a long time ago, we started studying through the book of Genesis. And I've been trying to plan on presenting this lesson, but I was waiting until I got a PowerPoint. So that's why we're kind of jumping back to this. But what do we do with dinosaurs as a Christian? So we got a couple options. We can either act like they never existed, which that's not going to work because they did. All right, thank you. All right, maybe now we're ready to go. All right, you should be able to hear me now. If you put your headphones on, you should be able to hear. All right. Can you hear me now? Like a cell phone commercial. All right. Okay. All right. Now that we're all back together again here. So dinosaurs. What do we do with that for a Christian? Well, you can either try to act like they didn't exist. Well, that don't make sense. They existed. We've got fossils. I mean, we know that dinosaurs existed. So how does that jive with what we know about the Bible? If the Bible's true, then how do we make dinosaurs and the Bible jive together? Is that impossible? Well, they say that dinosaurs ruled the earth. But who is the king of the dinosaurs? And if you ask the kids will tell you it's T-Rex. Tyrannosaurus Rex is the king of the dinosaurs. He's the meanest, baddest dude on the block. That's T-Rex is the king of the dinosaurs. But what we want to say this morning is we want to talk about the king of the dinosaurs. But it's not T-Rex. The king of the dinosaurs is God because he created them. God is the creator. We sing the song, Awesome God. We throw around the word awesome a lot. Oh, this is awesome. These new shoes are awesome. My new car is awesome. No, God is really awesome because of the power that he has. He creates all when you look at his creation. And so God is the king of the dinosaurs. And that's what we want to talk about this morning. The king of the dinosaurs, what the Bible has to say about dinosaurs. So hopefully this will be interesting and maybe different for you. Now, the first thing we want to talk about is the fact that God created the dinosaurs. So we know that they were real. We know they existed. Where did they come from? Well, God created them, of course. Now, you might be saying, well, the Bible don't say anything about dinosaurs. I've read through my Bible, and I've never come across the word dinosaur in my Bible. And I would say that is true. That's a fact. Because the word dinosaur wasn't coined until the mid-1800s, about 1840. So it literally wasn't in their vocabulary. If you're reading the King James Version, I like the King James Version, it was written in 1611. So it was 200 years after the King James Version was written that the dinosaur was coined. So nobody would have said the word dinosaur. So of course, If you read your Bible, you're not going to see the word dinosaur. But I think they're talked about, and that's what we'll look at. You know, in Genesis 1, when we start reading about creation, in verse 20, it says, God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly, after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good, and God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the fowl multiply in the earth, and the evening and the morning were the fifth day. So, on day 5, God created flying animals and animals that lived in the water. That would include things like this pterosaur. That's really not a great picture. But this guy had a wingspan up to 36 feet. That's pretty big. We bought a camper recently, and it's 40 feet long, I think. It's a big nuisance. It's big. But this animal, a flying animal, had a 36-foot wingspan. We know that. That's fossils that they dug up. That's a big creature. Can you imagine that dude flying over you? That's a big thing. 36 feet wingspan. But God created that on day 5. Pterosaur on day 5. If you notice when we were reading from Genesis 1 and verse 21, the King James Version says that God created great whales and every living creature that moveth. The word for whales is a Hebrew word called tannin. We're going to talk quite a bit about that in this lesson. But tannin, T-A-N-N-I-N, that's a Hebrew word that King James Version rendered whales. It means any large reptile. And if you read any other version, so if you're reading the New King James Version, it'll say great sea creatures. And so when I read that and think whale, I think of a whale. But I think the idea is more along, there's just all kind of great sea creatures that God created. And the Hebrew word tannin talks about that. So some examples of great sea creatures would be like this. The plesiosaurus. I did a lot of studying on how to say these words last night. The plesiosaurus is a great sea creature. They said this animal would live in the sea. The largest one that they found is about 50 feet long. It's a pretty good sized animal there. Some of them are between 30 and 35 feet, but the largest one they found was 50 feet long, and that's a big sea creature. So when God created the sea creatures, He created this thing that we know as the plesiosaurus. What about this one? This is the Liopleurodon. So this thing was created as well. And so the picture, I think, makes this one look longer than it really is, but this would only be about 25 feet long. So that's pretty small compared to some of these other things. But when God created sea creatures, He would have created this scary looking thing. What about this? The Dunkleosteus. Now that thing is pretty scary looking. It almost don't even look real. It looks like it's a clay model, but they got the whole big thing put together, and that is a sea creature that God created. Now, we're going to talk about this more, but if the word dinosaur wasn't in your vocabulary, what would you call that thing when you saw it? Would you call it maybe a dragon or a monster? I think that'd be something you'd call it. That's an ugly looking thing, and it's scary looking, so I'd call it a monster probably. But God created that when He created the sea creatures on day 5. Well, on day 6, there was more created. In Genesis 1 verse 24, it says, God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beast of the earth after his kind, and it was so. And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and God saw that it was good. So, on day 6, God created land animals, which would include things like cattle, but it would also include things like triceratops. I think we've all heard of this dinosaur. That picture makes it look pretty small, but the triceratops would be about 20 feet long. Weighs several tons. Big animal. When God created land creatures, it would also include things like this. I don't know if I can say this. Diplodocus. So, now that's a small picture, but they tell us the fossils of that thing would be about 90 to 100 feet long. So the head on that thing, the neck, would be about 25 feet long, and the tail would be even longer. Then the body would be big too. That's a big creature. 100 feet long, that's a big joker. Can you imagine hunting in the woods and walking up on that thing? Yeah. But God created that. He created land animals on day 6. And so, as we're looking at these things, we can either act like they didn't exist, which that's not, we know that they did. We've got fossils for these things. Or we can give God the recognition and glory because He created these things. God did a lot of work, and God is an awesome God. Now, why would God create big animals like this? Why would He even do that? What do you think about that question? Why would God create anything? I think that He did so for His good pleasure. To play a role in His creation before sin entered the world. You know, all the animals were created before sin and death entered the world. And so God, we see His ability to create and just how awesome He is by His creation. And so He created them for His good pleasure. Now, He had the ability to, and so He did. He created them. Now let me ask you another question. Or maybe you got this question for me. What were the first dinosaurs like? What were they like? I don't know that we can tell you everything that they were like, but I know 2 things about the first dinosaurs. One, they were good. And then number 2, they ate vegetation. They ate vegetables. In Genesis 1, verse 30, it says, to every beast of the earth, to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat, or for food. And it was so. And God saw that everything that He had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the 6th day. So, 2 things about those dinosaurs. They were very good, but they ate herbs. They ate vegetation. They ate vegetables. They did not eat meat. And so you may be thinking, hold on a second. Dinosaurs were vegetarians? There's no way. The movies tell us different. Everything I've ever read, these things are fierce hunters, and their teeth, they're scary, and they're just coming after people. There's no way they ate vegetation. Look at the skull of T-Rex. That's a Tyrannosaurus Rex. That's supposed to be the scariest one of all. Look at the teeth on that thing. And you're telling me that that thing ate vegetation? I'm telling you that's what the Bible record says. But also, you know, teeth do not always indicate what an animal's diet is. Now, you can't just tell what an animal eats by looking at their teeth. For instance, here's a picture of an animal's skull. This animal is alive on the earth today. We coexist with it. And it's real, it's not made up. Look at the teeth on that thing, they're sharp. You think that'll tear somebody up. Do you know what the skull of this animal is? It's a fruit bat. A fruit bat. And fruit bats eat fruit. That's what they do. And so you can't look at the teeth of that fruit bat and think, oh, it eats meat. No, that one eats fruit. What about this skull? Now that looks pretty scary. Look at that. Look at the strong jaw. I think that can do some damage. And it's got sharp teeth. Looks real vicious to me. You know what that skull goes to? Well, this is the skull of a panda bear. Panda bear. You know, they're pretty cuddly, just calm kind of creatures. I guess if they're attacked or provoked, they may lash out. But if you leave a panda bear alone, they eat bamboo. They'll eat it all day long. They'll keep to themselves. They're not just fierce, vicious hunters. And so panda bears have strong teeth. So my point is, you can't just look at an animal, and that's what a lot of people do. Look at the T-Rex's teeth. It was fierce. It had to just eat up anybody that was around it. It was a good thing there were 65 million years of space in between mankind and animals, and we just say that's not so. God created these animals, and He created them to eat vegetation, and that's what we see from the Genesis record. So, before sin and death entered the world, animals ate vegetation. After sin entered the world, after the flood, we see animals being meat eaters. That's the Bible record of it. Well, what else was created on day 6? Genesis 1:26. God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God created He him, male and female created He them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. So those verses are really important. What was created on day 6 along with animals? Mankind was created. Now, mankind was created on day 6. Now let me ask you a couple questions. Who was created in the image of God? Well, man was. Who was given dominion over the earth? Mankind was. Who had dominion over all the animals, including dinosaurs? Mankind. So out of all the things that God created, mankind was the crowning creation. And so there was never a time where dinosaurs ruled the earth opposed to God. God created all animals, but mankind was having dominion over them. They were to rule over them. So I think that's important. You know, when people say there's no way that dinosaurs could be around humans because they would just been eating everybody up. No. They didn't eat meat, and mankind had dominion over them. Again, this is all before sin and death entered into the world. Human beings were the crown of God's creation. And so if the Bible record is true, and we believe that it is, mankind and dinosaurs coexisted. Was that even possible? Again, 65 million years, we're told, separated dinosaurs and people. And the movies tell us that dinosaurs would eat people up. There's no way they could live together. But let's look at that question. Could mankind and dinosaurs coexist? I think it's an interesting question we have to answer. Now, I'm not suggesting this. We're not suggesting the Flintstones version of mankind and dinosaurs living together. You know, riding on a dinosaur here as a pet. That's not what we're suggesting when we say that mankind and dinosaurs live together. But what we are suggesting is that the Bible record is true. So let's fast forward a little bit to Genesis 7. This is, of course, the flood is about to come. And Noah had to build the ark, and animals were going to go onto the ark. Genesis 7 and verse 7 says, Noah went in, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him into the ark because of the waters of the flood, of clean beasts and of beasts that are not clean, and of fowls and of everything that creepeth upon the earth. There went in 2 and 2 unto Noah into the ark, the male and the female, as God had commanded Noah. And so, what we see here is that animals went in 2 by 2. We know that. I think that that would include the dinosaurs. They were animals that were created. And so you say, well, hold on, wouldn't they be too big? I mean, they're huge animals. Wouldn't they be too big to make it onto the ark? Well, a couple things. I think we don't need to forget that the ark was enormous. It was a big ship. I mean, only in modern times have they been able to build a vessel as big as the ark. It wasn't just some little fishing boat out in the middle of somewhere. No, it was a big vessel. It took Noah a long time, 100 years to build it. So the ark was enormous. But the second thing I'd say is that God, it seems that God sort of caused the animals to come to Noah to get onto the ark. And so I would say, and we talked about this when we studied it, if God can cause animals to come to the ark and get on there, God can cause them to behave, to sit down and behave while they're on the ark. And I guess the third thing would be that we don't know that they were full grown. The whole purpose for them to get on the ark was to survive the flood, get off the ark, and repopulate the earth. And so I would guess that there might not have been full-grown animals. It might have been just baby animals there. And then when they got off the ark, they were able to repopulate the earth. And so they might have just been younger baby animals. But if what we're saying here is that dinosaurs were animals. They would have gotten on the ark. Animals and dinosaurs and mankind would have coexisted at the same time on this earth. Everybody, people-wise, everybody animal-wise, that was on the ark was saved from the flood. All the animals that did not get on the ark, all the people that were not on the ark, they were killed. They were destroyed in the flood. And so I think this is really important because the global flood, Noah's flood, preserves for us today what we call the fossil record. The global flood explains why we find marine fossils on top of mountains. The global flood explains, again, why we even have a fossil record. Because waters covered up animals so fast that they were able to fossilize. We wouldn't even know about dinosaurs had we not had a global flood. Now, after the flood, did the dinosaurs get off the ark? I'd say if they got on, then they had to get off. And so you might be thinking, well, if they got off the ark and they lived among people, wouldn't we have some kind of eyewitness testimony? I mean, wouldn't we have somebody to say that they saw these things and lived among them? Well, yes, we would. And again, so as we go into the next set of verses, again, remember, the word dinosaur didn't exist And so they're not going to call things a dinosaur, but they would use words like dragon, monster, serpent, reptile. That's what they would call things. And so we do have some testimony in biblical record. If dinosaur was in the vocabulary, look at what people in the Bible call these creatures they come in contact with. In Psalm 74, verses 13 and 14, Donnie read these verses for us. It says, "Thou didst divide the sea by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters." So remember that Hebrew word tannin we said in Genesis 1:21, the King James Version called whales, other versions called sea creatures. Well, here the same Hebrew word is used where it says dragons. Thou breakest the heads of the tannin, the sea creatures, the dragons, in the waters. Then thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. We'll talk more about Leviathan in just a couple minutes. But here the psalmist talked about these sea creatures. In Jeremiah 51, verse 34, "Nebuchadrezzar, the king of Babylon, hath devoured me. He hath crushed me. He hath made me an empty vessel. He hath swallowed me up like a dragon." That's that same Hebrew word, tannin. "He hath filled his belly with my delicates. He hath cast me out." So, again, they're using this sea creature word, this Hebrew word tannin, and it's the King James Version is rendering it dragon. But there's some animal out there, a big sea creature, that it is called dragon here. In Ezekiel 29, verses 3 to 5, it says, "Speak and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great dragon," there's that word again, tannin, "that lieth in the midst of his rivers, which hath said, My river is mine own. I have made it for myself. I will put hooks in thy jaws, and I will cause the fish of thy rivers to stick into thy scales. And I will bring thee up out of the midst of the rivers, and all the fish of thy rivers shall stick into thy scales. And I will leave thee thrown into the wilderness, thee and all the fish of thy rivers that shall fall upon the open fields. Thou shalt not be brought together nor gathered. I have given thee for meat to the beasts of the field and to the fowls of heaven." So there's a context about what's being talked about here. Ezekiel is, prophesying. He's saying that there's going to be judgment coming from God against people, and so that's what the context is. But in the middle of that, he says he's comparing things to this great dragon or this great tannin, this great sea creature. And so for our purpose this morning, the prophet Ezekiel is mentioning that same Hebrew word tannin. In Ezekiel 32, verse 2, it says, "Son of man, take up lamentation for Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and say unto him, Thou art like a young lion of the nations, and thou art as a whale in the seas." So there's a word again, tannin, for whale. "And thou camest forth with rivers, and thou troubledest the waters with thy feet, and fouledst thy rivers." Okay, so in Ezekiel here, I think it's important that he mentions that thou art like a young lion of the nations. Is a lion a real animal? Well, it is, isn't it? We know that lion is a real thing. And then in the same sort of breath, talks about the lions and then talks about a whale of the seas, or that word tannin. Talks about a big sea creature. And so I think he's talking about real animals. It's not just some made-up, make-believe, we'll just come up with some kind of animal. I think the prophet Ezekiel is talking about real things. In Isaiah 30, in verse 6, it says, "The burden of the beast of the south into the land of trouble and anguish, from whence cometh the young and old lion, the viper," notice this, "and the fiery flying serpent. They will carry their riches upon the shoulders of young asses, and their treasure upon the bunches of camels, to a people that shall not profit them." So, in this verse, we're talking about young and old lions, we're talking about vipers, we're talking about donkeys, and we're talking about camels. 4 real animals, and right in the middle of all that, we mentioned the fiery flying serpent. That's that same Hebrew word. So I think that's interesting, isn't it? But again, I think in talking about real animals, they're not just throwing in some make-believe, they're talking about things that are real, things that existed. And so that's what Isaiah was saying there. In Isaiah 27 and verse 1, it says, "The day of the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea." So the word serpent is the Hebrew word tannin, or sea creature. Leviathan seems to be a type of one of these creatures, and we'll talk more about Leviathan. We've already talked about it once in Psalm 74, but Leviathan is mentioned. So all animals are real. The Bible mentions it. They mention some of these sea creatures that we would probably call dinosaurs. All right, now in Job 41, Job 41 is important because you remember what happened with Job. I mean, he suffered terrible loss, but he sort of got bitter in the middle chapters of the book of Job, and he started asking God some questions. kind of questioning God and his ability a little. And so God was answering his question. And so God says to him, okay, Job, canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook, or his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down? Canst thou put an hook into his nose, or bore his jaw through with a thorn? Will he make many supplications unto thee? Will he speak soft words unto thee? Will he make a covenant with thee? Wilt thou take him for a servant forever? Wilt thou play with him as with a bird? Or wilt thou bind him for thy maidens? Shall the companions make a banquet of him? Shall they part him among the merchants? Canst thou fill his skin with barbed irons, or his head with fish spears? Lay thine hand upon him, remember the battle, and do no more. So what God is saying is, that big creature Leviathan, Job, you want to question me, now can you call him out here and play with him? Like he's a little puppy or like a bird? No, you can't do that. It'll tear you up. And what God was saying was, well, I can. I created him. I can make him do whatever I want him to do. But the point is that God didn't use some mystical made-up creature when he talked to Job. He said to Job, think about Leviathan, that creature, whatever it is, and think about, can you draw him out with a hook? Can you do that? And of course the answer is no, he couldn't. That's a big creature that Job didn't want to mess with. He understood what God was talking about. And so I don't think God was just making up some creature, Leviathan. I think Job understood it, and I think it was a real creature. And so I think this is a case of what we would call the dinosaurs, is some big creature in Job chapter 41 called Leviathan. Now in Job 40, a similar situation, it says, behold now Behemoth, that's another name, Behemoth, which I made with thee, he eateth grass as an ox. Lo, now his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. He moveth his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are as strong pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. He is the chief of his ways of God. He that made him can make his sword to approach him. Surely the mountains bring him forth food, where all the beasts of the field play. He lieth under the shady trees, in the covert of the reed and fens. The shady trees cover him with their shadow, and the willows of the brook compass him about. Behold, he drinketh up a river, and hasteth not. He trusteth that he can draw up Jordan into his mouth. He taketh it with his eyes. His nose pierceth through snares. That's a pretty scary description, but again, God was talking to Job about this other creature called Behemoth, and just look at that description of it. Now, there's been people that have said, well, that's talking about an elephant. Well, think about an elephant, and it says that he has, this description says that his tail, he moved with his tail like a cedar. Elephants don't have a tail like a cedar. They got a little fly swatter for a tail. Well, somebody else says, well, that's probably a hippo. This animal seems to want to get down in the water and drink a lot of water. So a hippopotamus, maybe that's what it's talking about. Well, a hippopotamus has like a flap for a tail. You wouldn't describe a hippopotamus having a tail like a cedar. So I think that this is talking about a big creature that we would call a dinosaur. And the variety of its name was apparently Behemoth. And again, Job knew what God was talking about. And that description is pretty scary of a big animal. But Behemoth. So I think those two things are very important. Now again, when were those things made? Well, day 6, land animals were made. And so this Behemoth was made on day 6. Now real quick, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time, but outside of the Bible, history would tell us that dinosaurs were real, because there's several different examples. I just picked out a few. But this is a temple in Cambodia. And I can't say the name of it, but the city is Topram. And anyway, in this temple, there's a whole bunch of animals carved in to this temple. And it was made in 1186, so a little while ago. But in the middle of this temple, there is a carving of, normal animals, cattle, and different things. And then you come across this carving in the temple. Now, what is that? Well, if we compared it to what we know dinosaurs are, it looks like a stegosaurus. What's interesting about that is that the scientists will tell us that there's, again, 65 million year gap, and then we didn't start digging up and discovering fossils until the 1700s. So, in 1186, whenever this temple was built, they wouldn't have known anything about a dinosaur. They wouldn't have known anything about it, unless they just made up some kind of thing, and they just happened to make up something that looks exactly like fossils that were dug up 500 or 600 years later. And so I would just submit to you that they carved that out of memory. They'd seen these things. There you go. That's interesting. What about this pottery? Now, this is from Peru. There was a village of people in Peru, and supposedly this pottery is from around shortly after the time of Christ, a couple thousand years old. But on this pottery, what is that thing? I mean, that's not a dog or a cat for sure. They drew on this piece of pottery this big dragon-looking thing. Again, I don't think that necessarily proves or denies anything. I'm just saying that around this time frame, what we're told is we didn't find any fossils till the 1700s, and if there's a 65 million year gap, they wouldn't have known anything about a creature like this, but yet that's what they put on their pottery. So either they were just making stuff up, putting it on there, or they were putting things on there that they were familiar with. What about this? I don't know if you can see that real well, but this is actually a headstone, a stone that went over a place where somebody was buried. But you got a dinosaur here, and you got a man riding on top of it. Here's his leg coming down here, and he looks like he's holding a hatchet or something. But it looks like he's riding a Triceratops that we pulled up earlier. So again, same time frame. How would they have known anything about that? Why would you make a carved man riding a dinosaur if you didn't even know what they were, unless you were just making stuff up, which just so happened to several hundred years after this, they found fossils that look exactly like the thing that he made up. So again, I think that's interesting. Another set of proof that we might be able to use is there's a universal dragon legend around the world. You know, any culture you go to, there's dragon legends. In high school, I had read a book called Beowulf. This guy went to go fight a dragon. There's cartoons talk about I think his name's Sir George or whatever. He was a knight that went out to go fight dragons. There's just a universal legend. So either just this stuff's made up or it's based off of some truth that happened a long time ago. It's interesting about the dragon because people just thought it was just all made up until in 2003 a fellow found this thing. And so it looks a lot like a dragon, doesn't it? So this is in the Indianapolis Children's Museum here in Indianapolis, in this country. Looks quite a bit like a dragon. There's a picture of it, the full thing put together. So that was found in 2003. It's interesting, the guy that found it, so if you're a paleontologist and you find these fossils, you get the name on it. And so this guy named this thing Dracorex hogwartsia. So his kid's favorite movie is Harry Potter, and Hogwarts is Harry Potter, if you're familiar with that. So he named this thing Dracorex, which means ruler of the dragons, and Hogwartsia from Hogwarts. That's what the guy named it. But that was found in 2003. So I think dragons aren't just made up things. I mean, this is based off real things. And again, you can go and see this in person in Indianapolis. So that's interesting. So, could mankind coexist with dinosaurs? I think they could. I think we show some proof of that. Biblical proof and just extra biblical history. All right, what happened to the dinosaurs? Now here's the real question. You know, because now if I go out here into the woods, am I going to run across one of these big animals? No, I mean probably not. I mean, I guess it's possible, but I'd say no, probably not. What happened to the dinosaurs? Well, I've got two quick theories I'll throw out to you. The first one is reptiles grow as long as they live. Before the flood, people and maybe animals grew for as long as they lived, and well, not animals grew as long as they lived, but reptiles do. And people and animals lived a long, long time. You know, we always talk about how long they lived before the flood. You know, not just 100 years, not just 200, 700, 800. They lived a long time, and if a reptile is able to grow for 800 years, that'd be a big animal. And so one theory is that after the flood, when lifespan shortened up, reptiles weren't able to grow as long, and so they don't get as big. So maybe we got creatures running around out here that have the potential to be huge, they just don't have enough time to grow. That's one theory. But then probably the most likely would be that they went extinct. They went extinct for one reason or another. Animals go extinct for all the same reasons: hunting, lack of food, mankind destroying their habitat, disease, genetic problems, catastrophes like fire and flood, environmental changes. After the flood, the earth changed quite a bit. It was more of a tropical environment. And after the flood, the environment changed a little bit, so animals went extinct. Now, if you go to the museum and you ask them what happened to the dodo bird, they're going to tell you the dodo bird went extinct. What happened to dinosaurs? Well, a meteorite hit the earth 60 million years ago. That doesn't jive with the biblical record. I think they went extinct. But I think there's proof biblically and actually biblically that dinosaurs existed. So, When I talk about all this, what do dinosaurs do for Christians and the Bible? Why even spend time talking about this? Well, I think it does several things. God used dinosaurs like Leviathan and Behemoth to teach Job a lesson, and we should learn that lesson too. The lesson was God's in control. He's a powerful creator. He can control all of his creation. He's the only person that is really in charge. And so I don't need to get so high-minded and think that I'm big and bad and powerful. God made him. He was able to control it. That's the first thing we see. God's a powerful creator. The second thing I think we learned is that we know so much about these animals because of the Genesis flood. The flood really happened. The fossil record is preserved for us because of the global flood of Genesis. And so that's the second thing I think we really learned. And so thinking about that flood, that was a flood because of sin and judgment. And so God destroyed the world, and only the people in the boat were saved, animals and people alike. And so there's going to be another judgment to come. But in talking about that fossil record real quick, I got a quote here, and I almost forgot to read it, but Ken Ham, which is a creationist writer, he also founded the Creation Museum in Kentucky. He said, if Noah's flood were true, you would expect to find millions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down all over the earth. What do we actually see in the fossil record? Millions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down all over the earth. That's what we see. And so the Genesis flood, the way God tells it, and what we found out here with these fossils, they all line up, they all jive. It just makes sense that way. Now get back to the judgment of the flood. There's a lesson we need to learn from that flood, and that is that God is the judge and sin will be judged. It was with water, it was with a flood in Noah's day. The judgment to come is going to be with fire. 2 Peter 3 and verse 10 talks about that. The day of the Lord is going to come in which the elements will melt with fervent heat, the earth and the works therein will be burned up. So there is going to be another judgment coming, this time not with water, this time with fire. So that's what we learn when we think about dinosaurs. We learn about the judgment to come. And the Bible account of origins, beginnings is true and reasonable, and fossils of dinosaurs are exactly the kind of evidence that we would expect to find if the Genesis flood is true. And so what I'm telling you is that the Genesis record is true. Everything that we've found proves it. It's the kind of evidence we're looking for. So there's valuable lessons from looking at the king of the dinosaurs. The T-Rex is not king of the dinosaurs. God is. God is the king of the dinosaurs. All right. Hopefully that was a pretty interesting study for you. I think it was interesting for me. Never draw a lesson on dinosaurs before. But that's a good thing, though. We're trying to learn and trying to make sure that what we're believing is true and the record that we have is true. And so think about what we just talked about there at the end, I guess I'll take this with me, that judgment that God's going to send. So there's going to be another judgment day. Sin is going to be judged. Only the folks that are in the ark were saved. And so you got to be in the boat to be saved. And so for us, you have to be in the church. You have to be a part of the saved body. That's what church means. Are you a Christian? If you're not, you really need to consider being one. You need to in a good standing with God so that you'll be saved in the end. That's what we're looking for. Heaven after this life is over. Can we help you in any way become a Christian today? If you'd like to study more about it, please let us know. If you want to be baptized in Christ, we'll be willing to do that. If you need the prayers of the church, we ask that you let us know while we stand and sing this.